Next on Newsmax Prime, the targeting of Trump, not politically but personally. Disturbing new developments in a drug kingpin's plot to assassinate the presidential candidate. Then, the targeting of all of us. The FBI foils an attempt by ISIS to obtain Russian-connected nuclear know-how. And the Russian to Syrian skies leads to a close call, a near miss between Russian and American aircraft. Don't miss our program as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, the candidate in the crosshairs. A Mexican drug kingpin targets Donald Trump for assassination. But how real is this reported threat? Miranda Kahn has more from our Newsmax Prime newsroom. Miranda?
JD, unconfirmed reports resurfaced yesterday. They suggest escaped Mexican drug lord Joaquin Guzman, who goes by the name El Chapo, allegedly upped the stakes against Donald Trump. They suggest he has put a $100 million bounty on the billionaire turned presidential candidate. El Chapo's anger reportedly stems from comments Trump made about Mexicans. Now, you may recall word of El Chapo's threat, who's shown here in a dated photo, threatened Mr. Trump after his much talked about escape from that maximum security prison in Mexico. El Chapo reportedly told other inmates about the bounty before he escaped, saying he was upset over comments Trump made when announcing his candidacy back in June.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting.
Now, during that time, Trump responded via Twitter, posting this comment. Can you envision Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton negotiating with El Chapo? He posted a follow-up tweet saying Trump would kick his behind. Now, as for this latest threat, no specific sources were cited. Now, Mr. Trump beefed up security after that original threat, but no word yet on any actions he's taken after this latest report. JD, back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. For more, let's welcome in via Skype former New York Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. Bernie is also the author of the book, From Jailer to Jailed. Bernie, welcome back to Newsmax Prime. And, sir, what do you make of this threat? Good reason for Donald Trump to be concerned?
Well, anytime you're threatened by anyone, it's a reason for concern. This guy is a known killer. He's somebody known to the DEA, to the FBI, the U.S. Justice Department. He's involved in one of the largest drug cartels in the world. The amount of money he has access to or could put together, for some kind of reward or a bounty is enormous, really. And it's something that they should be concerned with, Do they have specific credible threats coming directly from him? I don't know. That's up to the intelligence community, the Bureau, the DEA. But I think, with all this chatter, I think it's something that we should, and Donald Trump should be actually concerned with.
Bernie, during some of your remarks, we were taking a look at the huge crowds that turn out to hear Trump speak. Can the Donald still run an effective campaign despite the presence of this threat?
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's no different than the threats they have on the president. This president has, I think at last count, there was a 400% increase in the amount of threats on President Obama than others. I personally know many of the guys that work on Donald Trump's campaign. They are the ultimate professionals. He has an extensive security team around him, highly qualified, and they're going to make sure that he gets through this campaign and does what he has to do. But there's still a need for concern always.
Do you believe our government is doing enough to pressure the Mexican government over El Chapo in view of his escape?
Yeah, I think they are. Look, this was a major embarrassment for Mexico. The last time this guy escaped, and he had escaped in the past, they said, well, we got him this time, and nobody has to worry about it. He's never going to get away again. And, now he's on the lam again. So at the end of the day, It's a big embarrassment, and I think they're going to do everything in their power to get them back. And if that includes the assistance of DOJ, the Department of Justice, we're going to put all our effort into it, or at least as much as Mexico will let us.
You just brought up the DOJ, and that Department of Justice is scheduled to release 6,000 prisoners, the largest federal release in American history. Do we have an overpopulation of people imprisoned for petty crimes? Is that the root of the call or the release we're going to see here?
Well, I think most of these, and I haven't seen all the information, I think most of these are drug-related crimes. These are, many first-time nonviolent offenses. In fact, I think every one of these are nonviolent offenses that were, guys who were sentenced to these draconian sentences for nonviolent crimes. I think that's a lot of what these numbers are. I don't know I don't have all the information, but if that's what it is, I think that the president is doing the right thing.
Bernie, do you worry, though, that a significant number of these folks who are released will go back and commit the same type of crimes again?
Well, here's the problem, JD, whether it's these guys or anybody released from prison. The system sort of contradicts its own mission statement. You're labeled a convicted felon from that point on. Your demise is almost inevitable. Your personal, professional annihilation for the rest of your life. So hopefully they can help get these guys jobs. Hopefully they can do something with them on the outside. But whether it's these guys or anybody else, once you're labeled a convicted felon, if you're a commercial fisherman and you caught too many fish, well, you can't never get another job. So at that rate, this is something that we have to be worried about. We have to do everything in our power to help these guys get back on their feet. And the government today, as it stands in the criminal justice system, doesn't necessarily do that.
Bernie Kerik, you bring an interesting perspective tonight. We thank you for it. Bernie, of course, the author of the book, From Jailer to Jailed. And as always, we thank the former New York Police Commissioner for his time on Newsmax Prime, because he brings such an interesting perspective from law enforcement and, yes, from the correctional side. Now let's bring in another voice for more perspective. Joining us from Newsmax New York, we welcome Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor and author of the book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. Alan, domestically, can you make the case for this early release of an estimated 100,000 prisoners? How is this going to work out legally?
Well, it's a Band-Aid on a big problem. We are the most over-confined country in the world. We confine more people in prison than any Western democracies. We have far too many people. The sentences are far too long. And this is a Band-Aid to a very, very large problem. Now, inevitably, among the thousands who are released, there are going to be some who will recidivate, and so there'll be criticism for that.
Well, let's boil it down. Recidivate means they will return to a life of crime, correct? In layman's
maybe
terms?
the same crime, maybe other crimes. Yeah, but inevitably, when you have a large population, there will be some who will commit crimes again. So it's not a risk-free process. On the other hand, there are so many people in prison today for sentences that are far too long in proportion to the crimes they committed, particularly nonviolent offenders, personal drug users, college kids who sold drugs, kids from the inner city who may be part of a drug culture. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's not a surgical step. It's a kind of blunderbuss step.
Well, and you say a blunderbuss step. I think it's an executive action in Congress right now. There's a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill. Would it have been better to wait on that bill to pass?
Well, the Constitution provides two ways of dealing with this. One, the president does have the authority in federal cases to commute, pardon, and do whatever it takes to free people from prison. Of course, Congress has the authority to legislate and to apply its legislation retroactively to people who are in prison. This requires a far more systematic approach, and what I think should happen is Congress should set up yet another committee, but a committee of experts, to look at how to redraft legislation to cut down the number of people who are needlessly in prison today. Remember, the person who suffers when they're in prison is not only the prisoners, but family members. They go on welfare. Prison is very expensive to the country. It's necessary. We live in a country with a lot of violence, but there are too many people in prison for nonviolent crimes today as well.
Minute 30 remains. Let's turn our focus to international law, at least in a sense. President Obama apologizing to the group Doctors Without Borders in the wake of that airstrike, an airstrike that our military says was called in by our Afghan allies. Was the president right to do that?
I think it's right to apologize for a mistake, but the president also ought to apologize to Israel for too quickly condemning Israel when, in the fog of war, Israel may have done something much like that. Remember, when you have terrorists who hide among civilians, it's going to be inevitable that there will be some civilian casualties. That's the nature of this kind of warfare. It's deliberate. Done by the terrorists. They purposely hide among civilians in order to get democracies like the United States and Israel in defending themselves and trying to protect their soldiers. Inevitably, there are going to be some events like this, but apologies are appropriate as long as it's coupled with corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again if it can be stopped.
And of course, that was the criticism that some of the insurgents were hiding out in or around that hospital. At any rate, Alan Dershowitz. Go ahead very quickly. Last statement.
No, even if they weren't hiding in and around the hospital, that's their tactic. They hide among civilians in order to induce fire at civilians. That's part of the tactic and strategy. We have to be smarter than they are.
Fair enough. Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for your time. Again, the name of his book is The Case Against the Iran Deal. More on national security and foreign involvement. A close call in the air over Syria between U.S. and Russian airplanes. Fred Fleitz and Mike Pregent analyze what has happened and what may be ahead as Newsmax Prime moves on this Wednesday night.